give us the presentation on Martagons as field Franz officer was unable to. He apparently had open heart surgery, so he's working through health issues also. So, Barbara, take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Sometimes this volume on this machine is a little low, so I'll try to be close so you can hear me. I'm a member of the Lily Society, North Star Lily Society for Minnesota. That's a regional organization. I live in Afton, and I've been gardening there for about 38 years. I garden in sand, and it's dry, and I'm getting tired of watering, as I'm sure you are. For those of you who were here early, you saw the background on this screen. I'm at my daughter's house, and I'm speaking from my granddaughter's bedroom because it's a big celebration for her younger sister's birthday today. So if you hear people noisy in the background, you'll know what's going on. I don't think so. They're mostly outside, so shouldn't be a problem. So let's see. Oops. Why aren't you working? There we go. Okay, there you got my name and my email address and the Lily Society website. So to start with, I like to talk about what lilies are. When we're talking about lilies with the North Star Lily Society or Martagon lilies, we're talking about the genus Lilium or true lilies. And the picture you see in front of you is called Aspen Gold. It's a Martagon hybridized in Minnesota, a really nice lily, and it seems to be very strong. It perennializes well and it increases well. Lilies are not lily of the valley. The term lily is used for lots and lots of different flowers and causes some confusion often. So they're not lilies of the valley, not canna lilies. Even these are all pretty flowers, but they're not lilies. Calla lilies, even hostas are sometimes called plantain lilies, and especially not daylilies, which causes no end of confusion because daylily people often just refer to their flowers as lilies, but they're not lilium, they're hemerocallis. So just for those of you who are pedantic like me and want to make sure we know what we're talking about, now you know. What does a lily look like? A lily is a bulb. It grows underground from a scaly bulb, and you can see that on the picture. I'm going to see if I can put an arrow there. There are roots that come from the bottom of the bulb. Those are called basal roots. If you buy a lily bulb, those roots should be fresh and lively. They shouldn't be dried up and black. If they are, you're probably not going to get anything out of that bulb. So look for nice fresh roots on the basal end of the bulb. Coming out of the bulb, you see this stem that goes up, and here's the ground line. Below the ground, along the stem, you may see what we call stem bulblets. You can pick those off and plant them, and you will have clones of your original lily bulb. There are also stem roots that grow underground, obviously anchoring the bulb. Further up, as the stem goes above the ground, you'll see the leaves. And in some lilies, you'll find that they form these little balls, we call them bulbils, along the stem in the leaf axils. And those will drop off and start a new, again, a clone of that lily. This is especially common in tiger lilies or Lilium lancifolium. And so for people who actually allow tiger lilies to grow, like me, you can have an abundance of those things to the point where they're really a weed. Above, then at the top of the stem, you'll see the inflorescence, and I have a better picture of that. This is a picture of the flower. You see the pistil in the middle, and at the top of the pistil, and I'll put my little arrow there again, right here is the stigma. That's where the pollen goes to fertilize the plant, the lily. The stamens along the, there are usually 6 of them. You see them here. This is the anther, which contains the pollen. Whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen. Let's go back. Oops, I went the wrong way. Yep, there we go. Sorry. You see the various parts. Now, here is the ovary. Where's that little arrow again? I lost it. Here we go. This is where the seed pod will form. if we go back, you see what the seed pod looks like. Lilies form lots and lots of seeds in these brown pods that appear at the end of the pedicel. The pedicel is where the blooms lie on here. So you'll get this seed pod and seeds. Those seeds can be planted. They will not be the same lily that you planted. They will be a hybrid because lilies are not self-fertile. They will not fertilize themselves for the most part. There may be some exceptions, but don't rely on seeds from a lily to be the same as the parent. Martagons are unique in many ways, and one of the ways is that their foliage forms a whorl around the stem. And you can see that in this picture. So you have essentially layers of foliage up the stem. And then at the top, of course, you have these buds where the flowers will form. When you grow lilies, there are 3 rules you need to follow: good drainage, and good drainage. They don't like to be wet, but they like their heads in the sun and their roots in the shade, if possible. That can be done with mulch. They do not like to have wet feet. In our zone 4, they prefer light shade, or what some people call dappled or high shade. They will grow in deep shade, but they do better with just a little bit of sunshine. Okay, so they need well-drained soil. We've already told you that. Most lilies need a cold period in the winter. So there are some that are native to the southeastern United States, and they obviously don't get as much cold as we do up here. But this is a place where higher zones have zone envy. It's harder for them to grow lilies than it is for us. For the most part, lilies like neutral to slightly acidic soil, and there are some exceptions to that, but mostly if your soil is neutral to slightly acidic, so a pH around 7 or a little bit lower, they'll be very happy in your soil. So why would you want to grow a Martagon lily? This is a lily species called Dalhansonii, a nice dark red with the gold in the throat of the lily. And you can see in a Martagon, most Martagons are Turk's cap. In other words, the petals are recurved and they face downward. So in that case, you also get to see the back of the petals, which are often very pretty. So why would you grow a Martagon lily? They're pretty easy to grow, and we'll talk more about some things you have to be careful about in a bit. I think they're beautiful, and I think that they're the gift to the northern gardener because they will thrive as far north as you can garden. So one of our most celebrated lily growers, Martagon lily growers, lives in the Northwest Territories, where routinely 60 below in the winter. Martagons perennialize very well. They will come back year after year after year. It's once you have them established, they are going to be with you. They come in every color except blue, and that's true of all lilies. All lilies come in all sorts of colors, but not blue. And they're really nice to harmonize with garden plants in your shade garden. Once you have it established, they will increase over the years. So if you start with 1 bulb, and I showed you Aspen Gold, the first year I had 1 stem. The next year I had 2 stems, which means the bulbs grew another bulb, whether it was a split or just multiplied under the ground. So the next year, in only 1 year, I went from 1 to 2. And that's not uncommon with Martagon lilies. So when you plant a Martagon lily, put them in, as I said before, high, light, or dappled shade. And it's especially nice to put them under a deciduous tree. If you plant them under an evergreen or a conifer, they're not going to do as well because conifers take up more liquid or water in the wintertime than a deciduous tree, which is more completely dormant. That means that the Martagon won't get very much moisture in the wintertime, and that can be hard on the lily. So under high, light, or dappled shade, and especially in the shade of a deciduous tree. Plant lilies like other bulbs, 4 to 6 inches deep or 3 times the height of the bulb. Now, I told you earlier, my garden is on very sandy soil in Afton. So I plant mine a bit deeper just because it gives them a better chance of having moisture during dry spells. So if you have really sandy soil, you might want to consider planting them maybe 8 inches deep. They'll still come up, they'll still bloom, they'll be fine. It just gives them a better chance of having moisture in dry periods. We recommend that you plant your Martagon lilies in the fall. You will find them for sale in the spring. But usually if you plant a Martagon in the spring, you won't get any blooms that year. You will the next summer, but the first summer they're unlikely to bloom, although occasionally you may get one. If you buy them in a pot, you probably have better luck than if you bought a bare bulb. And it's really important to mulch your lilies to preserve the moisture and keep their roots cool. So a nice mulch, keep it away from the stem, but a nice 2 to 3 inches of mulch around your lily will be good for it. And, you know, if you're using a good composted mulch, it'll give it some nutrients as well as preserving the moisture.
Barbara, I got a question.
Go ahead.
Where would be the best place to buy Martagons from?
North Star Lily Society bulb sale.
Okay.
That's
and I'm
really
assuming that's going to be in the fall.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a bit. But there are other places as well.
Okay.
Rose sells Martagons. Right, Rose? Well, you can just wave.
Okay.
Square House Gardens in Afton sells potted Martagons in the springtime, and I believe they sell bulbs in the fall, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
I know they buy them from some of our members who sell bulbs wholesale.
Oh,
There's
okay.
an online source, Faraway Flowers. She sells Martagons in the fall. You can look other places, but those are really reliable sources. We get many of our Martagons from other wholesalers, including the Lily Nook in Canada, Mac Lilies in Oregon, and the Lily Garden, which is also in Oregon, I believe.
Okay.
So there are a number of places that are good, reliable sources for Martagons.
Okay.
You should use a balanced fertilizer, 10-10-10, or even one with a higher middle number. And you should fertilize your lilies, and this goes for all lilies, not just Marts, in the spring when they first come up and after they bloom. And what you're doing is replenishing the nutrients that went into producing that great big inflorescence. Keep your lilies watered and well drained. You notice I keep telling you to keep them drained. Well, it is important. Martagons get to be fairly tall. Really 4 to 5 feet is not unusual at all, but they're very strong stemmed and they don't need to be staked, which is not always true of other lilies, but the Martagons are really very, very strong, so they don't need to have any extra help keeping the stem straight. Once your Martagon has bloomed and the petals fall, you can cut off the stem just below the inflorescence. Leave the rest of the stem in place so that it has leaves to continuously feed that bulb underground. If you're growing seeds, or you're growing and you want to have some seeds, obviously you don't deadhead. But if you're not looking for seeds, I recommend that you cut off the inflorescence. And we recommend that you clean up your lily bed in the fall and remove the spent stalks. Be careful when you pull them out that you don't pull out the bulb. But with recent recommendations not to clean up your garden, you can do that in the spring too. You just want to get rid of those stalks so that they're not, well, first of all, they're not aesthetic, but second of all, they may, if there's any disease, you want to get rid of it. Propagating Martagons can be done 3 different ways. The bulbs themselves, as I said earlier, will multiply. So after a few years, you may have a big clump with many stems, and you know that you have a clump of bulbs underground by the number of stems above ground. So if you're starting to see that your stems and your flowers are they're not as nice as they used to be. They're not as vigorous, and it's probably time to dig up that clump of bulbs and replant. You can scale lily bulbs and plant them in damp peat moss, and you will see that new bulbs will form along the basal plate. And be sure when you pull the scales off the bulb that you get a little bit of that basal plate so that you can get new bulbs growing there. There's a whole section on the North American Lily Society website, and I'll give you that in a bit, telling you how to do that. You can also grow Martagons from seeds, and it's a long process. Believe me, I've done it. Generally, it takes about 7 years from seed for Martagons to bloom. The one I did, and that was that pink one on the first slide, took the equivalent of 9 years. You can double up, so cold period, warm period, twice in a year instead of once, to give you a little shorter period of time. But nonetheless, it's going to be a slog, and it's going to require patience. Martagons are considered division 2 of lilies. There are 9 divisions in the lily family. They're characterized with tall stems and down-facing flowers, often with a recurved petal. They're the most shade and cold tolerant of all the lilies. And as I said earlier, as far north as zone 1, we're growing lilies. They bloom earlier than other lilies. So you'll see Martagons start to bloom in the middle of June, and they usually continue into early July. Now this year, because of the early spring and the warm weather, one of our members says hers are almost all in bloom already. I have 2 in bloom, and I expect a couple of more in a day or 2. I'm usually a little bit behind. Afton is in the lower St. Croix Valley and seems to be a little cooler here in the spring, and it takes a little longer for things to get going than it does in other parts. They become very popular, especially among hosta growers. And I think the reason is because they add some variety and color to hosta plantings. And I'll show you some pictures of that in a bit. You plant them in the fall and expect to pay a bit more for Martagon lilies than you do for Asiatics or Orientals or the hybrids. They run $15 to $25 a bulb. It can be more if it's a new one or a very special bulb. And it sometimes happens that even though you plant it in the fall, you don't get any flowers the next summer. And we call that sulking. It just takes a little while longer for a Martagon to acclimate and to be ready to send up a flower. So if you plant a Martagon this fall and next spring you see a stalk and it dies down, that's just its habit. It's a way of getting used to where it's growing, and the next year I'm sure you will get a bloom. But don't be surprised if that happens. I saw somebody ask this question on Facebook. My Martagon sent up a stalk and now it's all dead. That's not unusual. It's typical of Martagons. How are Martagons unique? And they, as we said earlier, they grow in the shade. Most lilies like to have full sun, but Martagons prefer shade. And if they're planted in the shade, the color will be deeper than it would be if you grew them in the sun. You can grow Martagons in the sun. You'll see more flowers and taller stems, but the color won't be as brilliant as if they were planted in part shade. Also, the flowers won't last as long if they're growing in sun. In shade, Martagon lily stem will bloom for at least 2 weeks because, you know, the blooms as they open successive opening up the stem. So you'll get blooms for at least 2 weeks and probably longer. When the Martagon is in bud, you will see the buds nod, and this is what it looks like. Again, another question on Facebook recently. My Martagons are nodding. This is normal for a Martagon. They bend over, and as the buds become more mature, it will straighten out again. This is not a problem. This is normal behavior for a Martagon lily. if you're going to transplant Martagons, you have a big clump and you need to divide them or it's in the wrong place, we recommend that you transplant them in August or as early as possible in the fall. That gives them plenty of time to develop roots in the new location and acclimate to having been moved. So be in a rush if you can. If you can transplant them and you need to transplant, don't wait until October like you would with some other lilies. But with Martagons, late August, early September are ideal. And if you're moving a Martagon and they're still green, no problem. Keep those leaves and stems intact. That will help them to produce more energy for the bulb and you'll get better results. Martagons are the ones you'll see in gardens. Most of them are hybrids. They're derived from 3 species. All of them are from Europe or Asia. Martagon is one species, and you saw that in that picture. They're dark red to pink to white in color. Hansonii is a smaller Martagon type lily. The flowers are not quite as recurved, but they're yellow, almost a golden yellow. Tsingtaoense is another one. These are orange and unusual for Martagons. These are up-facing flowers. There's a couple of other minor species not used very often, Disticum, which is orange and side-facing, and then I'm sure I'm going to butcher this word, Medioloides, which is an orange lily and it's down-facing. So all purple, dark reds, pinks, and whites are hybrids based on Martagon lilies. The yellows derive their color from Hansonii, and most of the oranges come from Tsingtaoense. Tsingtaoense is found in the Korean Peninsula and Japan. Martagon and Hansonii are Eurasian species. And I know that's more information that you needed. Here's a lovely dark red Martagon growing in a hosta bed. And this is why I think hosta lovers really like Martagons, because they really do enhance a bed of green leaves. Even when the leaves are variegated and they have blue or chartreuse, having a flower there can make it just a little bit more interesting in the shade garden. This one is a Martagon album, a white one, and I think it's a little overexposed, my fault. I photographed this last Tuesday in David Morris's hosta beds in Marine on St. Croix. But you can see that, you know, it's just a little bit of variety there in the bed and it adds some interest to the shade garden. This is a variety called Claude Schride. It's growing, this grew in my garden. I have since lost it and I told you they never die, but this one did. I am pretty unique in the ability to kill things. And I want to thank that goldfinch for making the picture more fun. Claude Schride is a very dependable variety, dark red with a little gold in the throats of the flowers. This is Aspen Gold. I talked about that before. A Minnesota hybrid, thrives in our climate and does very well. Unfortunately, the deer ate my stems this year, so I'm not going to see it in my garden, but it is a nice lily and I look forward to it next year and probably move it back to the fenced area. Black Prince is very dark purple color. I'm kind of really prone to these dark reds, dark purples in the Martagons. Munin is a pale pink. These are all relatively old varieties. They've been around a long time. But you notice on these flowers, and especially on this one, you can see it, how many flowers are on each stem. We're looking here at 2 stems blooming, and I didn't count them, but there's probably more than 20 flowers on each stem. So they're pretty spectacular when they're in bloom. This is a species, again, the one that I grew from seed. Now I don't grow from seed in the normal way. I just put it in the ground, and if they grow, they grow. And I've had good luck doing that. I get some interesting varieties because, as I said earlier, you're never going to get the clone when you sow seeds from a lily in your garden. Mrs. R.O. Backhouse is another old variety, yellow with spots. Again, a really tough, reliable Martagon. Orange Marmalade, a little bit different flower. Petals that are narrower, not quite as wide as you saw on the other flowers. I'm going to go back and show you. The other thing about Martagon flowers, and perhaps why they last so long, is, as you can see in this picture, the petals have a great deal of substance. Those are a heavy, thick petal on that flower. And that's very different than other lilies that you may grow, Asiatics, Orientals, and so on. Port wine, another dark red one. Again, this lily is almost 40 years old since it was first registered. Terrace City is a nice lily, slightly out facing, not totally down facing, but again, yellow with some red spots. So you can see there's lots of variety in Martagon lilies. If you have a bed where you're growing a certain color, you certainly can find a Martagon that will fit in with that bed. So now that I've got you all excited about growing Martagons, I need to alert you to a few problems that may arise. The first one is that your bulb may rot if the soil is too wet. So if you're gardening in really heavy clay soil and you have a very wet spring, this could happen. Hopefully you've added compost to the soil so that it drains well. Otherwise, if it gets waterlogged, it could be difficult for your bulb to survive. Botrytis is a fungus. I'm sure you've heard of botrytis. It affects peonies and other garden plants. In lilies, it usually happens because it's been very wet or you've given them too much nitrogen. You can use a fungicide to control it. If you see that you have botrytis, and usually botrytis begins at the base of the stem, just above the ground. So if you see that the leaves are turning brown, we recommend that you remove those brown affected leaves. That should help to prevent further infection. The other thing you can do is put some mulch down to kind of prevent those spores from splashing up onto your plant. In my experience, Martagons seem to be less susceptible to botrytis than other lilies. Here's a picture of a spot of botrytis. Usually when you see it in your garden, you may see something like this, or you may just see a brown leaf at the base of the stem. Another thing that can happen is the stem comes up in the spring and it's blind, no buds at all. That can happen because you had a late frost and it killed those buds, so they didn't develop. It may be that your bulb is just too young yet to form a blossom. It needs more time to grow under the ground, and with good photosynthesis that'll increase the size of the bulb, and the next year you're more likely to have a stem with flowers. In both cases, wait until next year. With frost, and I lost the bulbs on a Claude Shride 2 years in a row, so I developed this huge tomato cage blanket cover for that stem because I was tired of losing my Martagon lily bulb, my Martagon lily flower to the frost. And it can happen in Minnesota. So, watch the weather. And if it's going to be below freezing, you may want to cover them. Sometimes the stem simply doesn't appear, and you planted a lily in that spot, you put a marker there and there's no stem. Sometimes if you have a lot of them, voles will eat your bulbs, and that's obviously fatal. The other thing that can happen is the stems came up and the rabbits got them before you even saw them. That's fairly typical. My solution for that personally is to sprinkle Milorganite around lilies and other blooming bulbs, spring blooming bulbs, with Milorganite. It seems to repel the rabbits. Now, some people say that repels deer. That has not been my experience, but it does work for rabbits. Some people say that Martagons aren't as tasty to the deer as other lilies. I cannot attest to that. They eat my Martagons along with every other lily. That's why I have a fence. That's one way to deter them. Another thing to do is to use a repellent, whatever one you find works on your other plants that you don't want deer or other animals eating. And the other thing that you can do, especially if you have voles, is to plant your bulbs in wire cages underground. So make a cage with hardware wire and plant your bulb in the cage. The stem will come through, the roots will go into the ground, through the gaps in the mesh, and that will keep anything that eats them underground from eating them. Sometimes you'll find that the leaves on your Martagons are kind of streaky and brown. This can be caused, again, by frost. It sometimes looks like botrytis. And because Martagons seem to be the first to come up in the spring, it's more likely to affect a mart than other lilies. So again, if the frost threatens, cover the emerging plants. This is a Martagon that had frost damage, and you can see the brown along the edges. This brown spot here may be botrytis, and obviously if you've had frost, that'll weaken your plant. So it could be affected by botrytis as well as having the frost damage. Not a pretty picture. You want to avoid it if you can. Covering with a blanket or a sheet really does help.
Will that plant come back that
Yes,
year, or
next
do you
year,
have to wait till
not
next year?
You won't get any bloom on this plant,
Okay.
but you will the next year. It'll come back.
Okay.
The leaves are there, it's still feeding the bulb, it's still photosynthesizing, but it just won't create any blooms. And that's why, if you want to see your marts, it's good to cover them if you see the weather forecast is really cold.
Okay.
Virus in lilies, the most common one is the color break virus, very similar to what was seen in tulips, tulipomania, the flame-streaked lilies. In a lily, you're going to see petals with atypical streaks, and you can see that especially prominent in the orange and yellow lily on the left. Also look at the back of the petals, because sometimes you'll get streaking, but it won't be virus. If it's virus, you're going to see it on both the upper side and the lower side of the petals. This is not as common in Martagons as it is in Asiatics and some of the OTs. The lily on the right is an OT, and that one, it sometimes happens with pink lilies, not Martagons. I haven't seen this in Martagons, but in pink lilies, the pink isn't as stable as some other colors, and you may get the streaking, but it's not caused by virus, it's caused by heat. But that's not something you're going to see in a Martagon because they bloom so early. Although this year might be the proof that that's not true with all the heat we've been having. Finally, this is a future lily problem. We're hoping that it doesn't come here. This is the lily beetle. It's a small red beetle, and it has a nasty larva that eats holes in the leaves. And so your lilies will look terrible. It will also eat holes in your petals. The most recent sighting I've seen for the lily beetle is in Marshfield, Wisconsin, which to my mind isn't far enough away. There is a parasitic wasp that's been used, especially in New England, where they first had the lily beetle, and it's been quite effective there. You can also use various pesticides to get rid of them. But it really doesn't do it any good to the look of your lilies. There's a couple of garden views of lilies. This is from Spruce Grove, Alberta. Ian Evans hybridizes a lot of Martagons. He's in ideal place, probably zone 2. And he has a fenced area, and some of them he does, he actually dabs pollen on his lilies, and others are just open pollinated. But as you can see, it's an ideal place for Martagon lilies. Nice and cold in the winter and beautiful blooms in the summer. I'm not sure where this one is. It might be in Franz Officer's garden. But again, you see a gold colored mart and a red one, which is called Red Man, in a hosta bed with some ferns. In the back over here is probably Lilium. Where'd my arrow go? There it is. Lilium Martagon album, the white one. But you can see that the size of the stems, how many flowers are in each one. Martagons are truly floriferous and very vigorous. Here's another picture of some Martagons. And again, look at the number of blooms on each of those stems with lots of buds left to open. And as they open from the bottom up, and that's another reason that you'll have blooms for a longer period of time when you have so many in a Martagon. The North American Lily Society website has a whole Martagon link. So if you want more information about growing Martagons or the varieties available, that's a good place to look. Our website has some information about Martagons. It also has, I think I'm going to go to the next slide. I think it's there. Nope. Okay. So on our website, you can submit questions. You have a question about your lilies, someone will answer you, someone very knowledgeable. Dues for our Lily Society in Minnesota are $10 for 2 years, and NALs are $55 for 3 years, and you'll get some other things with that membership.
Jen asked the question.
Sales. Yes.
Sorry about that, Barbara.
No, that's fine.
Do they need stalking? Staking. Stalking. Okay, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Does anybody want to stalk a Martagon? Staking. Do they need staking?
Okay, rarely. I have never seen, I mean, everything I've read about Martagons is that they don't need to be staked. That stem is very strong in spite of the fact that there's so many buds on it and so many flowers. It's a very strong lily. It's nice. You won't find that trumpets especially tend to lean, and you might want to stake trumpet lilies. And there's some others that, you know, they get so tall and their flowers are bigger. So maybe it's because the flowers are bigger and heavier that they cause those stems to lean. But with the Martagons, no, I've never seen Martagons staked. I don't stake them in my yard. So,
okay.
Let's see. We have a bulb sale. And if you're a member, you get in at 9 and a 10% discount on all bulb purchases. Non-members are welcome at 10. And that's assuming we have an in-person sale. North Star sells about 50 varieties of Martagons every fall. Our prices are very good, usually a little bit below retail. Martagons are very popular. So often most of them are gone by 10 o'clock. So if you really want to buy Martagons, you should become a member. The prices range from 12 to 28 and about an average of $16 a bulb. The sale will be in October if Bachman's opens up the Heritage Room this fall. We haven't determined that yet, or I would have a date for you, but we simply haven't gotten any word from Bachman's about whether they're willing or able to open up yet for that sort of activity. Martagons that I recommend, you saw some of these, Claude Schride, that dark red one with the gold center. Vigorous, attractive, prolific. I even had an open pollen volunteer seedling of Claude Schride, so it's a really good lily. Val Hansonii is another one. Hansonii is shorter, so if you're looking for something maybe for the front of the bed in the shade, Hansonii might be a good one. Gold, yellow, nice flower. Lots of substance to the petals on that one. Mrs. R.O. Backhouse, again, an older variety, vigorous, prolific, and I talked about Aspen Gold before. There are lots and lots of varieties of Martagons and more hybrids being released every year. So if you have a color you like, you probably can find it, as long as it's not blue. North Star Lily Society has a Martagon tour in June. It's usually the Saturday of Father's Day weekend, and it's open to members or by invitation of the gardeners. And I think you'll find it very interesting. Now, I contacted some of the gardens on the tour this year. Jen Lands in Newport has 70 Martagons in bloom as we speak. And her Martagon garden will be open tomorrow between 9 and 4. And there's the address if you're interested. This is K&D Gardens in Farmington. They are a small family business selling lilies and daylilies, and they are they're welcoming visitors on Saturday the 19th, which is next Saturday, from 9:30 till 2:30. So if you want to see lilies, that's another good place to go. There are 2 other gardeners. I'm not sharing their information, but I said I would, if you want to go to some garden in the West Metro, contact me and I'll send you the information.
One of our members did say that you need to go early, as your North Star members go early as a member, or they're all gone. You won't be able to buy any bulbs.
Right. Well, our last 2 bulb sales were virtual, online, and actually, I think except one of the 3 was open to the public. The rest we just did members, and we did sell out. So
wow,
that was good. It hasn't always been the case. The international organization is called the North American Lily Society, or NALS. Their website is lilies.org. There is a seed exchange, and you can buy a packet of seed for a relatively low price. And I'm sorry, I don't know the exact, it used to be $1. It may be $2 now, I'm not sure. If you join North NALS, you'll get a copy of Let's Grow Lilies with your membership. They do have a Hall of Fame, so lilies that won the popularity contest are in that Hall of Fame. And once a year, there's a NALS show. This year, it will be virtual. If you're interested, you could go to the NALS site and register. It's $15, and there are a series spread throughout the summer of Zoom meetings. And one is on arranging, and one is on growing lilies in New Zealand. And I'm not sure what the other 2 are. So that's the end of my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to, darn it, oops. Happy to take any questions, and I want to thank you for inviting me to speak about Martagons, because lilies are one of my favorites, and I'm always happy to talk about them with others. So, any other questions?
I like that.
And here's my address. By the way, my marts will probably start opening in more numbers by the end of the week. And if you're interested in looking at mine, just please don't look at the Creeping Charlie. Just contact me by email, and I can give you the address, and we'll set up a time. No problem.
Okay. All right. Well, let me see here. Hit on. All right. Okay. Where is my, okay. I have I think, okay, one more time. Better places to buy Martagon lilies is a question from one of our members.
I already sold you on the North Star Lily Society. So Faraway Flowers is an online source. She's in Maine. She sells the nicest bulbs, really nice bulbs out of Faraway Flowers. The Lily Nook is in Canada, in Manitoba, just across the border. We order our bulbs for our bulb sale from them, some from them. And this year we had a little trouble with inspection, and so they came out too late for the original date of our bulb sale, so we had to have 2 dates. The Lily Garden is in Oregon, I think. It might be Washington State, but it's someplace up in there. And the other one is Mac Lilies, also in Oregon. And so all of those are good sources, both for Martagons and for all lilies.
one of our members says the best places to buy Martagons in the fall from North Star.
I'm
So
with
what you want
them.
to do is join their society, and then you can get in at 9, and you might be able to get 1 or 2 bulbs
They'll hire you
where
for
they're all sold
sales.
out.
Also, I forgot to say, Squire House Gardens in Afton sells Martagons. In the spring, they sell them in pots. In the fall, I'm not sure if they're in pots then or if they sell bulbs. Another place, if you're in southern Minnesota, Hidden Springs Flower Farm sells Martagons.
Can you back
Not
up your
very many.
Can you back
Yes.
up your screen to the address for the lily viewing that's for tomorrow? Okay, there you go.
Good idea.
There's the address. Oops, what did I do?
Seriously, no, I don't know anybody who has as many varieties as Jen Lands. She is the most addicted Martagon grower I know.
Even more than Franz Officer?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. She has thousands of dollars worth of Martagons in her garden. I'm
It,
always amazed at how many she buys.
Gary wants to know, is it normal to have a slow start? Okay, shoot, pickle, come back here. Um, is it normal to have a slow start to Martagons after digging up and transplanting?
In
Yes.
fact, if you did it too late in the year, you may not get any blooms the next summer. But they'll come back.
Okay. Does that help, Gary? I should just see. Let's see how noises this gets, folks. I'm going to allow everybody to ask everybody to unmute. You should be able to unmute yourselves at this point. And if it gets too noisy, I will mute everybody back. But I've allowed everybody to unmute themselves. So if you have a question, and Gary said that did answer his question. Do we have any other more questions? Anything else for Barbara?
I'm going to give you the other, this is the other open garden next Saturday. So
Okay.
if you, I assume you got in Newport now, you can try Farmington.
There you go. And if you copy down her email address at when she goes back to that page, she will always can give you a couple addresses of people that are in the West Metro. Okay, what did Gary said something else? Okay, Martagon bulbs may not come up the first year. Is that correct?
That's not very common. They usually come up, but they may not send up a flowering shoot. You'll
Okay.
see a stem and it may die down again. It could happen that they don't come up. But if they didn't come up, I think I'd dig it up and see what's under there.
Our
Because
friend
it
the
could be
voles
that
have already got
something
to it.
ate a, yeah. Or, you know, even squirrels or chipmunks, I guess, sometimes eat bulbs. One never knows.
Okay. If there are no more questions for Barbara, we're going to allow her to close off the share screen and allow her to enjoy the rest of her day. We do have some things I'd like to talk about at our meeting, and so I'm going to
Thank you very
stop.
much. I appreciate
Also,
the opportunity, and I hope some of you will grow some Martagons.
there you go.